Well, and this question, I suppose, is kind of on behalf of my students and people like that. And you can answer this with as much modesty as seems proper. What does it take to enter the diplomatic corps? Let's even say to rise in the diplomatic corps. I mean, what's for a young person? What's needed? What parts of them do they need to?
Well, I mean, people think it's academic. Academic achievement. Yes, that's an essential. But everyone that applies has the requisite academic qualifications. So we're not looking for the most highly intelligent person in the world. Like, we're not looking for the we're not sort of judging people purely on their academic merit. So you have to have a certain academic standard to get in. That's for sure. And we all have that. But I think what we're looking for in the Foreign Service is, you look at somebody and you say, okay, how would that person do if I sent him or her to Saudi Arabia, which is, we have 2 diplomats there, maybe 3. And now, what if the ambassador got sick and had to go home? And this person was on their own representing Ireland in Saudi Arabia. How would they fare? So that's really what we're looking for, is people who have the flexibility, the adaptability, the sort of the common sense to be able to survive in an environment they're thrown into, and unexpected things happen to you. I mean, I, for example, ended up when I was in Malaysia having to cope with the Southeast Asian tsunami. Now, no training in the world, there's no academic course you could take that would tell you what you should do when you're in a tsunami situation and you have to try and look for Irish people who are missing, and then try to repatriate the remains of those who lost their lives. So there's no academic training. There's no training manual, indeed, for that kind of thing, frankly, because it's too generous. And you have to be able to respond to those things. And when you're looking at a candidate for a job in the Foreign Service, you're looking to see, what if that person was thrown into a situation which is unforeseen, unpredictable? How would they fare? How would they cope? So I think, if I were giving advice, I would say you have to have the academic smarts, of course, but you need to be able to show that you have something else in your quiver as well, that you're not just a one-lane highway, that you have a few other things to offer. So I think, evidence of having done other things, and a lot of people now, of course,
presumably, but
a lot of people now do serve. I mean, it used to be you had to go into the service straight from college, because I think the age limit was 25 or 26. Beyond that, you couldn't join. Now you can join any age. So typically now people do spend a few years doing something else, and therefore there's a bit of a track record there that you can look to. So, and then I think obviously, if you don't have an interest in the world around you, you should find another occupation. I mean, if you don't have interest, I mean, I would say the biggest.
You don't like travel, for example.
Exactly. But the biggest virtue that, the best quality that a diplomat could have is curiosity.
Yeah.
Because you're sent to a place, you're new to the place, and if you're not curious, if you're not able to satisfy your curiosity by coming to terms with where you are, then you should be in some other profession. You have to also be highly flexible. You have to be willing, to go. I mean, to maybe move from Geneva to somewhere in Africa, and that kind of, someone might very much like to be, serving in New York, but would they like to serve in an African country that they may never have thought about? So you have to be willing to be adaptable and flexible, and to rise to challenges that you can't anticipate at the beginning of your career.
Right. So obviously the one thing that people picked up when Joe Biden got elected as president was the fact he was always quoting Irish poetry. Yeah. And it's a thing that you do because that's what you're representing. Why is Irish poetry in particular seems to have this huge cachet within the United States? It does seem incredibly powerful, and in a way that Biden, and then upwards, downwards, the way people seem to connect with it, be it a Heaney, be it a Yeats, it does seem to have an incredible power to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Yeats' second coming. A lot of Yeats' work is a speechwriter's dream, and I know myself from writing speeches. You love to find a quotation that you can decorate your speech with, because it looks good, it sounds good, and you're somehow you're drawing on the canon for your ideas, and that's a good thing. So I know that in the era of Bill Clinton, even in those days, Heaney was used quite a bit by Clinton speechwriters, and Yeats was used a lot, and Joe Biden has used Yeats. And in fact, I've two great stories, and one is Bill Clinton there at the memorial service for Jean Kennedy Smith, which I took part in. I spoke at as well, and Bill Clinton spoke, and he spoke about arriving in Dublin late one evening from Belfast, having had a very long day, and he was eager to go to bed. He was tired, he was exhausted, and Jean Kennedy Smith met him at the airport and brought him back to the residence, and he was about to say, "Good night, Jean, I'm going to bed." And it turned out that she'd invited Seamus Heaney around. He said he stayed up until 3 a.m. And he said at one stage, Jean Kennedy Smith said to Seamus, "Would you mind, Seamus, writing out a version in your own hand of the Curate Troy?" Which he did. And Clinton held it up and says, "This is it. I had it framed. This is the Curate Troy, written out by Seamus Heaney in his own hand back in the 1990s in Dublin." And he hadn't forgotten that experience. So that's a good example of how, poetry, the power of poetry to actually make an impact on someone like Bill Clinton, who had the whole world at his footsteps, obviously, or at his fingertips as American president. But nonetheless, meeting Seamus Heaney was a powerful enough experience for him that he remembered it still, and he had the evidence of it in the form of Heaney's manuscript of the Curate Troy. Yeah. And then, Joe Biden's, use of Yeats, and he always says, yes, that's what I want to say. On the campaign trail, he met this young man, Braden Harrington, who had a very, very bad speech impediment. And Joe Biden took him aside and gave him a copy of Yeats's poems and said, "I learned to speak properly, to get over my stammer, by reciting and reading Yeats's poems aloud." And this week, as a gift to President Biden, we got young Braden Harrington to do a reading of The Lake Galavinich Free.
That's beautiful.
And he read the first verse, and then a Choctaw poet who was the first recipient of the Choctaw Ireland Scholarship, who just graduated from UCC last week, she read the second verse. And then the third verse was read by the young man with an African background who won the Poetry Aloud competition last year in Ireland. So it was a beautiful piece, and I know it moved the president very deeply when he got it, because he mentioned it in the meeting with the Taoiseach. How about that? Yeah. So that's the power of poetry to kind of break down, to kind of communicate with people in ways that you couldn't do in prose.
And in terms of that power, particularly, think about that thing where Biden joked constantly about, I'm going to recite Irish poetry at you, or you're sick of me reciting Irish poetry. The man who at that point was on his way to becoming president of America, he wasn't talking about Italian poets or British poets or South American poets or even American poets. He's talking about Irish poets. And the fact that's going to be on CNN, that's going to be on Fox, it's going to be across the kind of board in the country you're living in. How much easier does it make the job? Just in terms of, the man in the Oval Office is pushing your brand before you even get into the room.
Well, that's all. Look, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who controls Congress, our job is to connect with the administration of the day, not to be taking sides and being partisan, because you're partisan, you're fine. You might be fine for 4 years being partisan, but you might pay for it when the coin is flipped and a different party comes into power. So we've always managed to have, and for example, we have preserved this tradition of the Patrick's Day visit to America, going back, 50 years now. And it's been done by presidents with an Irish heritage, presidents with no Irish heritage, Republicans, Democrats, across the board, it's been done. And the last administration kept up that pattern. And in fact, President Trump appeared to enjoy very much the Patrick's Day events. He seemed to rise to the occasion and really seemed to enjoy what he was doing on that day. So, and he didn't have any Irish connection apart from the golf club that he owns in Clare. But nonetheless, the fact that it's been preserved throughout the last number of decades is a sign that it means something, not just to Republicans or Democrats, but it means something to Americans generally, and that's why it has this appeal.